The night air felt heavy with a secret that was about to be uncovered. In a dark parking lot, a police officer stood face to face with a young man who looked completely out of place. This was the moment that would change everything. The officer didn't waste any time on small talk. He looked the young man in the eye and said, "We want to talk to you about tonight, about something you put on social media." The young man's face went pale, and his confident look disappeared instantly. He started to stammer, his voice shaking as the reality of the situation began to sink in. "So, I'm so sorry. I don't really want to be in trouble," he pleaded, hoping for a way out. But the officer remained calm and firm. He knew exactly what he was looking for. He didn't offer any comfort, only a direct command that left no room for excuses. "Sure, understood. What's your passcode?" the officer asked. This 22-year-old was an employee at a YMCA summer camp, a place where parents trusted him with their children. But behind that friendly face was a digital world that was as disturbing as it gets. The officer waited, hand held out for the phone, as the high-stakes opening of this investigation began. The suspect's silence spoke louder than any words could. He knew that once he gave up that code, his secret life would be laid bare for the world to see. The story behind that intense moment in the parking lot started a few minutes earlier inside the bar. A man named Kevin, who worked at the establishment, noticed something that made him very worried. He approached an officer to report a serious matter regarding a person he had seen on Snapchat. Kevin explained that he had met a group of people at the bar recently, and they seemed like cool people at first. They had even traded contact information through Snapchat. However, things took a dark turn when Kevin checked his phone later. He saw that one of the men in the group was posting disturbing things on his Snapchat story. The man was using the app like a digital store, trying to sell illegal and disturbing content to anyone who followed him. Kevin was so shocked by what he saw that he immediately deleted and blocked the person, but not before making sure he had enough information to tell the police. He even had a friend help him take a picture of the suspect's profile, so he wouldn't lose the evidence. Kevin told the officer that the man had been at the bar the week before and was likely part of a large group of about 15 people. These people weren't just random strangers. They were staff members from a nearby YMCA summer camp. This information made the situation much more urgent. If this man was selling such awful things online while working around children, the police had to act fast to stop him before anyone else got hurt. The police knew they had to be very smart about how they caught the suspect. If he saw them coming, he could easily press a few buttons on his phone and delete all the evidence forever. They decided that the best way to find him was to use the bar's security cameras. While one officer spoke with Kevin to get more details, others began a live hunt by scanning the surveillance feeds from the previous week. As they watched the screen, something happened that they did not expect. The man they were looking for suddenly walked right back into the bar at that very moment. It was a lucky break, but it also made the situation very tense. The officers watched the live video closely, trying to spot him in the crowded room. They saw a large group of people near the front door. The officers talked back and forth over their radios, trying to make sure they had the right person. "Is that him outside right there in that smiley shirt?" one asked. They needed to be absolutely sure before they moved in. They knew that if they made one wrong move, the predator might realize what was happening and hide his phone. They watched him touch his chin and stand with his friends, completely unaware that the police were tracking his every move on the screen. This was their only shot to catch him with the evidence still on his device. The officers on the street received the confirmation they needed from the surveillance team. There was no doubt now. The man in the crowd was their suspect. He stood out clearly in the dark parking lot, wearing a black Nirvana t-shirt with a large yellow smiley face on the front. He was also wearing skinny jeans and was seen touching his chin while talking to his large group of friends. The police moved in quickly but stayed as quiet as possible so they wouldn't scare him off. They walked right up to the group, focused entirely on the man in the smiley shirt. "How you doing, sir?" one officer asked, his voice calm but serious. He didn't give the suspect a chance to move away or reach for his phone. "You want to step over to our police car real quick and talk to us?" The suspect looked surprised and confused as he was led away from his friends. His colleagues watched in silence, wondering why their friend was being singled out by the law. As they reached the patrol car, the officer's tone became even firmer. He knew that the phone in the suspect's pocket held all the secrets they needed. To make sure the suspect didn't try to delete anything or grab a weapon, the officer gave a very clear command. Just keep your hands out your pocket. The trap was set, and the smiley shirt that made him easy to find was now the mark of a man whose night was about to take a very dark turn. While the suspect was being questioned at the patrol car, the rest of the group from the YMCA watched from a short distance away. They looked confused and worried as they saw their coworker being separated from them. The officers knew it was important to talk to the group to see if they knew anything about what was happening. One officer walked over to the crowd and asked, "Are you guys all together with him?" The colleagues nodded and explained that they all worked together at the summer camp. Some worked in the kitchen while others were training to be instructors. They seemed like normal young adults who had just come out to the bar to have some fun after a long week of work. They told the police that they were only in the area for the summer season. The officer tried to keep the conversation calm so the group wouldn't panic. He explained that he was recording the talk, but that no one's in trouble at that moment. He asked them if they had seen any strange social media activity or if the suspect had been acting oddly. The coworkers shook their heads, saying they hadn't noticed anything wrong. It was clear that they had no idea about the disturbing secrets their friend was hiding on his phone. They were just a group of friends who suddenly found themselves in the middle of a serious police investigation. The officer led the young man away from the crowd and stood him near the front of the police car. "Just keep your hands out your pocket," the officer ordered again, making sure the situation stayed safe. The young man looked nervous as he stood there in his black Nirvana shirt, realizing he was now the center of a real investigation. The officer began the field interview by asking simple questions to see how the suspect would react. He asked where the man worked and how long he had been there. The suspect claimed he had only been at the YMCA camp for about a month. The officer then asked how often he came to this bar. The man stammered, saying he came maybe 3 times and usually only on Fridays. As the questions continued, the young man started to act very worried. "But please, I don't want to be in trouble," he said suddenly. This caught the officer's attention. He asked why someone would say they didn't want to be in trouble if they hadn't done anything wrong. The suspect just shook his head and claimed he didn't know why he said it. The officer kept his voice calm but stayed very observant, watching every move the man made while they talked under the bright parking lot lights. The crowd of coworkers stood nearby, their faces filled with shock as they realized their friend was in serious trouble. They were all part of the same team at the YMCA, living and working together in the camp cabins. The officers turned to the group and asked if they had ever noticed anything strange about the suspect's social media or if they were involved in his online activities. The colleagues quickly shook their heads, looking completely blindsided by the news that they were hanging out with someone the police called a predator. One of the coworkers, looking very worried, asked if they were all going to be in trouble. The officer assured them that no one's in trouble, except for the person they were investigating. It was a chilling moment for the staff. They had spent their summer cleaning, training, and eating meals with a man who was secretly living a double life. As the suspect stood by the car, his friends began to step back, realizing that the person they thought they knew was actually a stranger with a very dark secret. The officer looked at the young man and asked if he had a phone. Raphael reached into his pocket and pulled out his cell phone. The officer knew this device was the key to the whole case. He asked if the phone was locked with a passcode. At first, the suspect tried to be tricky and said it wasn't locked, but the officer could see that wasn't true. "What's your passcode?" the officer asked again, his voice steady. Raphael hesitated, his face showing a mix of fear and guilt. He tried to lie one more time, claiming he didn't have any social media apps at all. But the officer didn't believe him because a witness had already seen his Snapchat profile. When the officer pushed for the truth, Raphael finally admitted he had Snapchat but claimed it was just for his friends. He tried to act like he didn't understand the questions very well, using the language barrier as a shield. He kept saying, "I don't really want to be in trouble," over and over again. The officer stayed patient and explained that they were looking into serious allegations about him distributing illegal things online. Eventually, Raphael gave up the first of many lies, admitting he had downloaded certain things to his phone, but he still wouldn't tell the whole truth about what they were. The mood in the parking lot grew even more serious as the officers realized Raphael was trying to hide behind a wall of confusion. Even though he spoke English well enough to understand what was happening, he began to act as if he didn't quite follow the officers' words. One of the officers stepped forward to handle this. "Do you understand everything he said to you so far?" he asked. Raphael nodded, but his eyes were full of worry. The officer then explained that they needed to read him his rights, often called Miranda rights. He made it very clear that Raphael didn't have to talk if he didn't want to. "You don't have to say anything. Do you understand that?" the officer asked slowly. Raphael suddenly looked around at the patrol car and his friends and said, "I want to go." But the investigation had gone too far for him to simply walk away. The officers patiently explained that while he wasn't under arrest yet, he had to understand his rights before they could ask more questions. Raphael kept trying to pretend he was confused, saying, "I don't understand really well what you need." The officers knew this was a tactic to stall for time. They stayed firm, making sure he knew that the situation was very real and that his nice guy act was no longer working. The officer reached out and took the phone from Raphael's hand. The small screen glowed in the dark parking lot, holding all the answers to the disturbing questions the police were asking. Now that they had the passcode, the phone search could finally begin. As the detective started to scroll through the apps and folders, the confident look Raphael had earlier was completely gone. At first, the detective saw the normal things you would find on a young man's phone, like photos of friends and music apps. But as he dug deeper into the Snapchat account and private folders, he began discovering the first few files that shouldn't be there. He found images and videos that were unholy and illegal. Each swipe of the finger revealed more evidence of a dark digital life that Raphael had been living in secret. The detective showed one of the images to Raphael and asked where it came from. Raphael looked away, his face pale as he realized the police were seeing everything. He tried to say he just found them on the internet or that they were sent to him by mistake, but the sheer number of files made those excuses sound like lies. The detective didn't stop. He kept searching, knowing that these first few files were just the beginning of a much larger and more terrifying discovery. With the disturbing files now appearing on the screen, the detective's focus shifted to a much more urgent worry: the YMCA summer camp. He knew that Raphael worked at a place filled with hundreds of children who trusted him. The detective looked at Raphael and asked a very important question: "Do you supervise children at all?" Raphael quickly shook his head and claimed he had no interaction with the kids. He insisted that his only job was to clean the camp, take care of trucks, and maintain the grounds. He even said there was a strict rule at the camp that staff were not allowed to take photos of the children. "I can't do that," he said over and over, trying to convince the officers that the campers were safe from his predatory habits. However, the detectives weren't so sure. They knew that people who have these kinds of files often look for more wherever they can. They worried that the safety of the children at the camp might be at risk. Even though Raphael claimed he only slept in a cabin with other men and never touched anyone at the camp, the disgusting content on his phone made it very hard to believe him. The search continued, with the officers looking specifically for any photos that might have been taken inside the camp walls. As the detectives looked deeper into the phone, they found something that changed the case from a recent mistake into a long-term habit. They discovered a 2017 archive, which proved that Raphael had been collecting and sharing these unholy pictures for many years. This wasn't something that had just started a few days ago like he tried to claim. He had been doing this since he was much younger. The evidence showed thousands of pieces of disturbing content that had been circulating for a long time. Some of the images showed victims who were very young, which made the detectives even more determined to get the truth. Seeing files from as far back as 2017 made it clear that Raphael was a serial predator who had been living this secret life for over 5 years. It wasn't just a few random photos from the internet. It was a huge collection that he had organized and kept for a long time. This discovery proved that Raphael was lying when he said he didn't know how the files got there. The detectives now had proof that his illegal activities were a permanent part of who he was, making the danger he posed to the summer camp even more terrifying. The detectives took Raphael to a quiet room for a grinding interrogation to get to the truth. The lead detective sat across from him and looked through the phone again, his face showing how much he disliked what he saw. He looked at Raphael and said, "I'm sitting here going through your phone. You have images of kids on here." He pushed Raphael to be honest, telling him it was time to be honest with me and explain to me what's going on. The detective was very direct about the disgusting content. He pointed out that Raphael wasn't just finding things by accident. He was looking specifically for them and trying to sell them. "You're trying to sell it," the detective said, showing him the proof on the screen. Raphael tried to look away, but the detective wouldn't let him hide. He told Raphael that he couldn't blame the internet or say the account wasn't his because it was right there on his own phone. It was a very tense moment as the detective asked if Raphael was recording these things himself or finding them online. The nice guy act Raphael tried to use earlier was completely gone. The detectives made it clear that they knew exactly what he was doing and that there was no way for him to lie his way out of it anymore. The room felt very small as the reality of his predatory choices finally caught up to him. As the detectives showed him more and more evidence, Raphael tried one last time to protect himself by making up a new excuse. When the detective pointed to an account on the phone screen that was filled with illegal content, Raphael quickly claimed it wasn't his. "My sister account," he said, trying to blame a family member for the unholy pictures. He even claimed that the name Felix on the account belonged to her and not him. The detectives didn't believe this for a second. They reminded him that they were holding his phone and that he had been using this specific account every single day. "You're still using this account every day. You're on here," the detective told him firmly. Raphael tried to say he had only started using it a few days ago, but the detectives pointed out that he had Dropbox and folders already set up to collect even more files. The detective explained that Raphael was likely trying to give the appearance of having a lot of content so that other people would send him more in exchange. This final lie about his sister was the last straw for the investigators. They had dismantled every excuse he tried to use, from the language barrier to the "it was just on the internet" defense. Raphael sat in silence as his final attempt to shift the blame fell apart completely. The time for talk was over. The detectives told Raphael that they had enough evidence to hold him responsible for his actions. One of the officers looked at him and said, "You're going to be charged with possession of and the intent to distribute." Raphael's face fell as he realized there was no way out. He asked with a small, shaking voice, "Are you going to jail?" The officer didn't hesitate with the answer, "You're going to jail, to county jail." The officers led him away from the patrol car where they had spent the last hour uncovering his secrets. As the handcuffs were likely prepared, the reality of the situation finally hit him. He wasn't thinking about the children he might have hurt or the illegal files he had shared. He was only thinking about his own life. "I'm going to lose my job," he whimpered as they walked toward the transport vehicle. The officers didn't offer him any pity, simply telling him to watch yourself get in, as they put him in the back of the car. The Nirvana shirt and the cool guy image were gone, replaced by the cold reality of a jail cell. The final chapter of this dark story ends with a clear sense of justice being served. Raphael was immediately removed from his position at the YMCA camp, and the parents were likely relieved to know the predator was no longer around their children. The co-workers he had been out with that night were left to process the shocking truth about the person they thought was a friend. By uncovering the files that had been circulating since 2017, the detectives ensured that Raphael could no longer hide behind his nice guy mask. Raphael was charged with possession and the intent to distribute illegal material, and he remained in the county jail to face the consequences of his crimes. The police work that began with a single tip from a whistleblower ended up protecting countless children from a man who used his job to hide his true nature. This story serves as a reminder that the digital world often hides dark secrets, but through careful investigation and the courage of witnesses like Kevin, those secrets can be brought into the light. The summer camp returned to being a safe place for kids, and a serial predator was finally off the streets for good.